Excellent.
So
Yeah.
I couldn't quite hear you what you were just talking about, Rabbi. Could you repeat that?
Ah, let me take my dentures out and yeah. Okay, listen, we should all be in good health and have many, many long years with our beloveds. Yeah. All right, I think we're going to start, and whoever comes after this.
Well, can I say this real quick?
Sure.
Since we're talking about age, because I'm turning 70 in February, my wife and I also just celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary.
That is
So,
Mazel Tov. That is
yeah,
fabulous.
so my brothers and sister and her family, they're coming down. We're going to have a big party in March because of the weather and to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary.
Mazel, that is fabulous. Many, many more in good health together.
Amen.
Uh, that's beautiful. We're at 29, uh, but I got married later in life. Um, yep. Okay, so having said all that, I'd like to open up with any questions from last week's meeting. Anything you'd like to mention before we begin? Happy to hear it. Something remaining, lurking. Okay, so the last thing that we were looking at, and I'll let you know where we're going to start with. This might be a little bit of a review. The last thing that we were looking at was the opinion that there are seven things that separate the uneducated or the uncultured person from the cultured person. And we're going to summarize that in a bit. But one of the last things of that list is that a cultured person is not ashamed or embarrassed to say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. So my first pulpit as a rabbi of a congregation, I was an assistant rabbi, then an associate rabbi in a place in Stamford, Connecticut. And I had just come from being in a cocoon of very Orthodox Judaism for 8 years at Yeshiva University, which is at the upper part of Manhattan. And I had my interview with a committee of 10 or so. And the rabbi then, who has since passed on, the rabbi then, who was the founder of the synagogue, and he was in his 46th year when I came along, one of the questions that somebody said was, how do you feel about doing interfaith projects? Because our rabbi, our senior rabbi, is very heavily involved in all kinds of projects that have an interfaith purpose, get to know each other, get to be with each other, find out more about each other, etc. How do you feel about having part of your time involved in interfaith activities? And I said, I have no idea how I feel about that because I've just spent 8 years in the cocoon of yeshiva world, Talmud study, and I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I don't know. And then somebody said, our chief rabbi is also very involved specifically with work with Christians, Christian Jewish relations. He spends a considerable amount of time with that. How do you feel about uh, these kind of activities? Is this something you feel comfortable to participate in? And I said, I have to give you the same answer. I don't know. I've been in the cocoon of a traditional Orthodox Judaism for 8 years. My nose has been in the books, and I don't know how I feel about getting involved in interfaith relations. I just don't know. Well, it turned out that when they deliberated, how you doing, Robert?
Hello, sir. How are you?
Thank
Hello,
God. Good to see you.
everyone.
What was that?
Just say sharing hello with everyone.
Oh,
Shalom.
shalom, shalom. Thank you very much. Good to have you.
Great
It
being
turned
here.
out that when the committee was deliberating, that they had things that they liked about what I said, things that didn't like what I said. One person who was eventually going to become the president of the synagogue, he says, you know something that really impressed me? I loved it every time he said, I don't know. Like that was honest, it was genuine. He didn't try to paper over something that he wasn't sure about. He was clear that he was not clear. And to me, he said that points to integrity. And I like a rabbi of integrity. And I felt good about saying I don't know because between you and me, I really didn't know how I would feel about either of those areas and getting involved. I just didn't know because my focus for 8 years has been at Yeshiva University, in a neighborhood of 2, 3 blocks, and that's all I had. Anyway, so I feel that's a very important part of whether you're teaching or learning is just to admit, I don't know. I don't know. And very often people that ask me questions as a rabbi, they expect me to know the gamut of everything and anything Jewish, and I don't know. We specialize in certain areas, and other than that, there are some who do know everything. They've been raised that way, or they're avid readers and studiers, and they know much more than the average. But if you don't know, it's good to say it. So uh, here is we had a rabbi named Rabbi Tendler. Tendler, he was living in Muncie, New York, since passed on, and he would tell us as budding rabbis in training, he would say to us that when he got phone calls or people after the morning services would approach him with any kinds of questions, if it's something that needed to be answered right away and he knew the answer or he knew how to guide them in that area, he would say it. But if it was like deeper than your average question that needed a deeper than average answer, he would say to them, um, wow, that is a great question. Let me go home and research it, and God willing, I will get back to you. But he said, in terms of his education and his upbringing, 9 out of 10 questions, he knew the answer. So you would say, well, why didn't he tell them right away what the answer or guidance or guiding principles are to help them better understand what the answer is? And he said, it conveys a sense of importance. When you say, let me look it up, it's a great question. Let me look it up, and then I'll get back to you. It conveys to the asker that they are important and what they've asked is very important, and it's worth taking my time to look it up and make sure I give you the right kind of guidance on this particular issue. And that's why he did it, even though 9 out of 10 times he knew the exact answer, but he wanted to convey that I appreciate the depth of your question. And what does that do? It creates the next question. So people would come to him often because they knew that he had integrity in the sense that, yeah, let me look it up, you know? And I think he taught us a really, really great lesson in doing that. Another corollary of all that teaching, and then I'm going to summarize those 7 things that separate the wise or the cultured from the not so wise or not so cultured person, is that it's often very important for people to hear critique. I go to a meeting and I go to a class, whatever, and you know, tell me, did you enjoy the last class, or did you get anything out of it? If the critique is, well, I don't know if I got that much out of it. That's good for me to know. Well, I don't know. I didn't really understand it. That's good for me to know. Well, I didn't really care for the topic or whatever. That critique for me is very, very important, and I welcome it. I say, criticize, criticize. I got thick skin, and tell me what's on your mind. You won't embarrass me, shame me, insult me in any way. I need the feedback, and feedback is very important. So I think that's an important aspect too of what people say to you, not just the compliments, but also the critique, etc. So let's summarize the 7 teachings, and then we'll move on from there. The first teaching, one should be careful not to speak before another who is wiser or older. Kind of a way to say, remember your place in the group. Remember who you are, where you came from, who's sitting around you. Let the older, wiser ones speak first, and then do that. Is that an ironclad rule? Not necessarily. It's just if you're cultured, you have a sense of who's around you, and you are okay to give that spot to the people who are older and wiser before you share what you'd like to share with the other people. Another point is once the other person has begun to speak, don't interrupt them. Some people interrupt a lot, and it almost conveys the sense that whatever you're saying is maybe important, but what I got to say, because I'm interrupting you, what I've got to say is a lot more important than what you have to say. So don't interrupt people. Let them talk. And I think I mentioned last week, I find as somebody who did interviews for 5 years on a radio show, most of the good stuff is when they feel that they've said what they want to say and they say more. They say more, and that's the time you take out your pad and go, oh, oh. So let the person speak. It's just a common derech eretz. It's common decency to let people talk and not to override them or over chat them. Just wait till they finish. The third one was when the person speaking or asking is finished, don't feel a rush to reply. Now, we don't extend that today to people in general, especially people who are in a um, congressional meeting or something, right? All the questions are biting. It's a yes or no question. Well, I was thinking that it's a yes or no. How many things are yes or no? Everything has a background, everything has a context. Well, it's not just yes or no. So today we're not that kind to other people, especially people in power or people who have prestige, where they feel in a rush to reply because that's what's expected. And if you took too long to reply, it's all over YouTube, it's all over Facebook. Wow, it wasn't clear to them how they feel about X, Y, or Z. You might have seen that by now viral a YouTube of a senator asking this doctor, do you believe that men can get pregnant? Which I think that's a pretty yes or no. I think yes or no. Danced all around it, and the fact that she wasn't unequivocal in an answer, and the fact that she didn't answer quickly and took her time, that's what made the news. I mean, the opinion also made the news when she didn't know, or she wasn't sure, whatever it was. So don't be in a rush to reply. Give people breathing room to say something. And when people ask you a question, feel like you've got all the time in the world to respond, and maybe you should give that level of thought before you say anything. When you do begin to speak, ask relevant questions. We talked about that last week as well. Ask relevant questions. You may remember the teaching about between each of the Ten Commandments, a beautiful fragrance was released at Mount Sinai, and only when that fragrance dissipated, then came the next commandment. And that was a teaching that was recommended by a rabbi to other educators who asked the question when students want to ask a question, but it's off topic, should you take it or delay it until the topic is done? There were various opinions, but that's one thing that, in a sense, separates the cultured from the uncultured, is that they're able to uh, stay to the relevant topic and not carry people off into some other subsidiary kind of a conversation. Another one was that you should reply in a sequential fashion. Not everybody does that. Maybe you don't need to do that all the time. They ask you 3 questions at a press conference, answer one first, then two, then three. Usually people say, well, let me answer the last question first. So it's not an ironclad rule. It's just a subtlety that would convey um, a cultured person that they answer things in logical fashion. The next one was when you're in doubt, you should say freely, as we mentioned in the beginning, I don't know. I just don't know. And, shoot me. Shoot me. I don't know the answer to that question, even though you're dying to get an answer and you want to get an answer quick and you won't give me time to think. I don't know. And then after the last one is after replying, you should be ready to recant and admit the truth. Be open to critique, sometimes negative critique, all in the name of truth. So if you said something and you feel like, oh, I think I just made a big boo-boo, big mistake. I had the wrong information. Be honest enough to admit, in the interest of truth, I have to say I misinformed all of you, and here's what I should have said. And so those 7 things as a composite suggest this teaching are what separate the person of culture. Maybe that's not the right word, but I'll use it. The person of culture versus the one who maybe lacks culture or couth, as we would say today, couth. He's uncouth. And you don't hear people describing others as couth. You ever hear somebody say, boy, is he couth? But we have uncouth, which is a series of other words that we don't use the just we have a prefix to it, but we don't use the actual word like couth. Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. Uh, Any questions or comments on any of this so far? Does it make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm in the education environment as well. And so what we do is we have what we call a parking lot, and we have a white piece of paper on the wall or board or wherever. And they have sticky notes, and everybody has sticky notes. So they don't interrupt you. They write down their little question, and then they stick it up on the parking lot. And then later on during a break or at the end or whatever, we'll go back and read all those comments. So you don't have to interrupt the flow of instruction. And so it helps that way. So
That's a lovely thought. What does that mean in the parking lot? That's
it's
like a
just what they call
bulletin
it.
board?
Yeah, kind of like that, but they just call it a parking lot, put it up in the parking lot.
That's very innovative.
Yep.
At the end, we'll take a look at all the little post-it notes and see what was everybody's mind. That's very nice.
Because you might have people that have the same question, and there's two up there the same, that kind of thing. It kind of eliminates all that chatter. Yeah.
Nice idea.
Yeah.
Good job. I think I would consider incorporating that into the way I teach. Okay, so before we go on to the next teaching, I would just say that one thing that's very, very important when we stand and we teach, or we stand and we share something, etc., especially as a rabbi, I can tell you this is so true. And I may have mentioned this phrase last week. In Hebrew, da lifnei mi ata omed, know before whom you stand. So we had this teaching in earlier parts of Pirke Avot. How do you avoid sin? You do this, and always know before whom you stand. And the basic application of this idea is that when you pray or study or deal with your faith texts or do good works, be conscious of the divine presence before whom you are doing your work. If you imagine God, Hashem, whatever you want to call him, if you imagine him watching what you're doing and what you're saying, and you are aware of before whom you stand, that will make your work or words a lot more meaningful and a lot more elevated. When you have that God consciousness, imagining that God is watching you every step of the way. And in that way, you sense that God not only is interested in the spiritual work that you're doing, but that he cares about every aspect of what you're doing. Every aspect, how you do it, with what mood did you do it? When you gave tzedakah, when you gave charity, did you do it happily or not happily, begrudgingly or graciously? And Maimonides has a ladder of giving where he goes from 1 to 8. 8 is the top way of giving charity, which happens to be that the giver doesn't know the receiver doesn't know the giver. It's totally anonymous, nobody's embarrassed, etc. And then as you move down the scale, one thing that becomes more prominent than others is what was your spirit when you gave? All right, here, take your 10 shekels already, or whatever. What was the mood with which you gave what you gave? That becomes a very important aspect. of the giving. How did you feel about it? What was your sense of joy, even in giving? So, know before whom you stand is very, very important, especially when you stand in front of a congregation. You have to know who are the people, you know? Who are the people? There, I mentioned last week, every congregation has its strike zone. There's some people there who are above average intelligence or whatever you want to call it, and some who are lower. And now you've got to find that, you can't be too esoteric, you can't be too simple. You can't be too spiritual, you can't be too material. You have to know where the people are, and you have to know what they need to hear. So I remember, what was it, 1993? Was that the Oslo Accords? Was that with Clinton and Yasser Arafat and who was it? Not Shimon Peres, but here's my 71 showing. Who is it?
Was it Begin
Yitzhak
by any
Rabin.
chance?
Was it
Yes,
Yitzhak Rabin? And he was kind of, Bill Clinton put his arms around both him and Arafat, and they were kind of forced to shake hands, and it was like a very wobbly kind of a handshake that neither one was, well, Arafat was probably happy with it. But why do I mention that? Yeah. So that took place 1 week before Rosh Hashanah. And a good rabbi has their Rosh Hashanah sermon prepared weeks in advance. And a group of us rabbis were talking right about the Oslo Accords, and they said, well, who has ripped up the sermon they were going to give on Rosh Hashanah? And rather you would talk about the Oslo Accords, Israel, peace. Anybody rip up their old sermon? And out of about 20, everybody ripped up their old sermon because they felt that their congregation needed to hear their reaction to what's going on here in the world arena with Israel and Egypt and whatever. Peace treaty, yes, no, should we, shouldn't we? So sometimes the rabbi or whoever the spiritual leader is has to know, or a good guess, what do they need to hear? So the clergy position, if I could summarize it in one sentence, is not that easy, especially if you want to stay in a particular congregation. If it doesn't bother you that you don't stay, you can ignore all of this. But it's important to know that, I don't know if I ever use this term in Yiddish, Sitzfleisch. It means uh, how much time do you have? How patient can you be sitting and listening? Sitzfleisch. It's like sitting flesh. How long is the average attention span of your congregation? You have to know that. The show 60 Minutes, is it still on? I don't have a TV, so I don't know. Is it still on, 60 Minutes? Yeah. 60 Minutes was a revolution. It gave you 5, 6 stories in an hour. Because what they realized was that nobody can sit through an hour of one topic. They did all kinds of surveys. People can't sit that long for one topic. So they came up with another format where they touch 5, 6 different topics. And now, I can do 10 minutes, that kind of a thing. So that's a big, big thing. Know before whom you stand. If you go inside a synagogue, very often on top of the Holy Ark, there is a message, sometimes taken from the Bible, from the Tanakh, from the Torah, wherever. And it's usually a phrase that people would want to see often to help them focus on their prayers. And it's often a phrase that gets people, could be meditative. And the most often phrase found at the top of the Holy Ark is this phrase: know before whom you stand. So in a congregation, we face the ark. So even if you're distracted, you don't know what the heck is going on, when you look up at the ark and you're reminded, oh yeah, it's not just me standing, but there's a before whom I am standing. So that's become a very important part of Jewish practice. So the next teaching is in the Chabad website. If you might be looking at it, or check it out later. It's a teaching number 15. Um, so I'll mention parts of the teaching because sometimes it's a little, what did he mean by that? Or what did he say? What did he say? It has some very fine points to it, which we'll either appreciate or not. And if we don't appreciate, I'm ready to go to the next teaching. The teaching says it's another one with a number, as all of them have been so far in the 5th chapter of Pirke Avot. They have a number. There are 10 generations and 10 things that. There are 5 things that. There are 7 things that. This one is a 4. This is a 4. And the teaching is there are 4 types of audiences and people within these audiences. There are 4 types. Now, does that mean there can't be 12 types? There could be. This particular author of it's an anonymous author of teaching number 15. He separates the speakers and the listeners into 4 different kinds of audiences. One is the sponge. The other one is a funnel. The other one is a strainer. And the 4th one is a sieve. Now, if you can explain to me the difference between a strainer and a sieve, you get the golden ring today. Anybody know what the difference is between a strainer and a sieve? That's right. I Googled it and I still don't know the difference between a strainer and a sieve. Apparently, it has a lot to do with both of them seem to have like a mesh bowl, if you will, a mesh catcher. And apparently, the difference is one has bigger holes and one has smaller holes. So if you want to collect or separate very fine flour from the ants that might have gotten into your flour bag, you might use a sieve. If you want to separate bigger things, you might use a strainer. But beyond that, I couldn't tell you the difference. And if you know it, you can educate all of us.
To me, I think of the kitchen. A strainer is something you're straining off like a liquid, and a sieve is something you use like it's like a solid, like a flour or a dry good or something. I don't know. It's just in my brain how I kind of
Okay,
see it, but I could be totally wrong.
you could be totally right. I mean, I did several Google searches and I still don't get it. But so what does this mean? Each of the 4 types of listeners who are there to be learners, they could either be a sponge, a funnel, a strainer, or a sieve. They have positive and desirable qualities and also negative ones. So maybe we'll just concentrate on the positive ones. The sponge. In what way is the speaker or the listener a sponge? But I guess it's going to focus on the listener. The sponge absorbs everything, the minutest detail to the highest, flightiest theory. So they are the absorbers. All the material, they absorb it quickly. They listen carefully. They're not distracted. They feel everything is relevant. That 1 hour class, everything is relevant. One way I know who is a sponge generally is who brought a notebook. Somebody brings a notebook to a class, like an adult education class. They bring a notebook. I don't know what they're writing there. It could be tomorrow's shopping list. What do I know? I hope not. But that means they are cocked and ready. I am ready to hear and absorb and listen and understand and ask questions. They are fully into it. Okay. It mentions a downside too, that the one who's the sponge doesn't share his knowledge easily. They need to be squeezed to share it. I don't know if I resonate with that. This is the opinion of the author of this 15th teaching, the 15th Mishnah. So I think I just good to cover the positive aspects of these 4 types of audiences. The funnel. Uh, they are unable to keep anything inside. It goes in one ear, if it does, We're lucky if it goes in even in one ear. That's a blessing as a teacher. Wow, one ear is good. But it goes in one ear and comes out the other. They can't recall what they just heard, not even one specific lesson or idea. So I know somebody like that who goes to classes very often, and I would say to them, "So what did you learn?" And their consistent answer is, I don't know that I can remember any points. And that's after an hour of sitting there. I don't know that I can remember any specific point. Now, is that an intellectual situation? Is that a cognitive, whatever? But that would be a funnel. A funnel is a boom and right out. They cannot grasp. Okay. The strainer. The strainer keeps the bad and passes on the good. In other words, whatever they heard, which they may not remember everything, but the good points, they're happy to pass it along. The listener or the audience that's a strainer. They don't remember everything, but the ones they do remember, they pass it along with fullness and excitement and enthusiasm, etc. They're able to discern between the important parts of the lessons and maybe the more trivial parts of the lessons, but they somehow grab the important parts, even if they forgot the less important parts. So that would be the strainer. And now the sieve, they keep the good and pass on the bad. So how is that different than the one we just keep? The strainer keeps the bad and passes on the good, and the sifter keeps the good and passes on the bad. That almost sounds like the strainer, doesn't it? Keep the bad, passes on the good. Yeah. So maybe there's just a subtle difference between those two. They discern what's important, but only remember the most important ingredients, and the other stuff they can't recall, even though it might have been important, but to them it seemed trivial or not relevant to what was being discussed, whatever. Um, then the commentators come along with this categorization of four different kinds of listeners, and they say that this can even represent the four stages that students go through. Huh. The sponge. A student is young. The child absorbs everything. As we know with children or grandchildren, they catch everything that's being said in the house. Everything. So every Monday afternoon after I finish teaching my high school girls, I take out my grandson, who's 8, for about an hour and a half or 2 hours until his karate class. And we just talk about what's going on in the family. This kid has heard everything his parents have said, and he passes it along. And it's amazing. He's like a sponge. He's a sponge, and he listens carefully. And that the young have that capacity, in terms of their development. They're able to listen carefully and pass on carefully, etc. The funnel. Eventually, the child gets tired and may lose focus. The teacher's words pass right through them, and then the student needs a break. As I see that often with my high school girls. They come in enthusiastic, they're asking questions, and they want to know, and what about this, what about that? And at some point, they have their head on the desk. They're pooped from all that thinking or whatever. And then they need a break. And I say to them, do you want to step out for 5 minutes? Do you want to stay? Then there's the student who's a strainer. When the student matures and grows older, he gains the ability to distinguish between different kinds of information, but they can't yet grasp the deep concepts, which are compared to wine. And they retain only the lower level of teachings, but they retain it really well, really, really well. And the student who is the sieve is like the highest level in a student's development. What does that mean? He has the ability to identify and forget unessential teachings. Just foofs that away. He's not interested in the unessential stuff, but they can remember the finer and deeper and essential points of what was taught. So that's taking these four kinds of audiences and saying that they also apply not just to general audiences, but also to kids as they are developing and maturing and getting a little bit older. They have a different kinds of capacities. So that's interesting that you can apply it even to uh, kids growing up, going to school and getting educated. There's another interpretation of these four categories of listeners, which is the attitude a person may have to their family's heritage and their religious life. What do I mean by that? The sponges. They follow all the traditions of their family. They keep them whether they understand them or not. Doesn't matter. This is what Bubby, grandma, this is what Zadie, grandpa, this is what they taught us, and this is what they do, this is what our parents do, this is what we do, and this is what we're going to pass on to our children. And it doesn't matter whether we understand it, why we wave a chicken over our head the day before Yom Kippur, or why we don't wear wool and linen together. Doesn't matter. That's the tradition, that's the custom, and that's what we're doing. No deviation at all, like a sponge, like a sponge. Then there's the funnels, where others often consider themselves wiser than their parents. What did they know? Wool and linen? What did they know? And I'm a little bit smarter than them, even though our parents tend to get smarter with age. The more we age, the smarter they've become, that kind of a thing. But they consider themselves wiser than their parents and grandparents and their ancestors, and all of it passes through their heads, and they retain nothing of their ancestral heritage. Are there Jewish people like that who are totally uneducated? Yeah, tons. Tons. I just had a Zoom meeting with a couple. I'm doing their marriage in June, and he claims that his family is totally unobservant, uneducated, Jewishly uneducated. And he said this wedding ceremony and what's going to be done before, during, and after it will be the most Jewish education anybody in the family has ever had. So, yeah, within Jewish families, within other faith-based families, they're like a funnel. All that stuff that's the old stuff. We're in a new generation. Can we jazz this thing up a little bit? I have a rabbi friend of mine, who, when he thinks something is stupid, like a Jewish tradition or ritual, he will say, "That's stupid." And I would say, "You're a rabbi. If you think these things are stupid, how did you become a rabbi?" Okay, he has his answer to that question. But so there are those who feel that, yeah, it goes in one ear, not the other, because it has no relevance to me. I'm not interested. And they remain uninterested, even though with all kinds of educational platforms today, all the different ways you can learn and become a scholar without meeting a single person in your faith tradition. You can become a scholar on the internet, and a good one. You can become a good one. But the funnels don't necessarily have an interest, and it goes in one ear and comes out the other. The strainer, they retain some of what they grew up with, but they feel no use or relevance for the major teachings and celebrations and the traditional ways to connect to God. So they grew up with a little bit, but the major teachings they're not interested in. Oh, I like, we often had, still do, Friday night guests, and they watch us for the first time. They, for the first time, watch us blessing our children. They never saw it before. And often they would say, wow, look at what we're watching. You're blessing your kids. You put your hands on top of their heads. You whisper something into their ear, like something spiritual, like it's your turn to clear or whatever. We don't do that. But uh, you know, they like those kind of things, but like the bigger picture, the bigger themes, the bigger ideologies, thanks, but no thanks. So they retain I'm not going to say trivial, but they retain what they perceive as the less and the more is somewhere out there, but they're not particularly interested. And the people who are the sieve, these are the ones who are able to perceive clearly the authentic spiritual legacy of their ancestors and discard anything that belittles or contradicts what they know as truth as they learn it. They discard anything that goes against it. Like, oh, that's silly, that's stupid, that's dumb. Why do you still do that? They're happy to discard those kinds of attitudes, and they are happy to maintain whatever the spiritual, almost like the sponge, maintain the spiritual legacy into which they were born. And what can you say about religious teachers and leaders who stand in front of the audiences? What can we expect of them? That they should seek to bring people closer to an understanding of God and their faith texts. And this is accomplished by setting the proper moral and spiritual example, by being deeply steeped in learning, by encouraging students to ask questions and think on their own. So in contrast, these are religious leaders, and there are religious leaders and teachers who try to magnify their own importance while minimizing the spiritual and intellectual powers of their students and listeners. I'll give you an example, and I hope that this, I'm not going to mention a name. Somebody, a colleague of mine, just started a new job in a new city, and he's been there for 6 months, and he's been very active in meeting a lot of the people that he should be meeting, other clergy of different faiths. He's meeting the congressmen and the senators and the chief of police and the other important people within the power structure of his community. And I just saw a clip of him as he is talking in a group, and one of the people in the group is his personal rabbi, who was his main influence, and they had each written a book, so they were exchanging books. So this gentleman, who's been at his job for about a half a year in this new city, he says, I just want you to know how important Rabbi X has been to me. And he's sitting right there, this Rabbi X. He says, even on those occasions where I've been meeting with congressmen and senators, even on those occasions where I've been meeting different faith leaders, even on those occasions where I've been meeting with movers and shakers and da 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 da, I still always think of what you taught me, Rabbi X. That has always stayed with me, even during all of these kinds of activities. And as I'm listening, I'm saying to myself, I think you've overpoured your ego into what you just said. Now, you may disagree, and I would be interested to hear your comments. Because now you have let us know all these important people that you have been meeting with and taking pictures with and posting on Facebook. I just met again with the mayor. I just met again. It didn't feel as pure, if you will. It felt like the ego somehow popped out of the cake. And I'm torn as to whether to say something to him, just like as a little peep in the back of his mind, you know, saying something like, you ought to be maybe more cognizant of how it came across. Anybody have an opinion on that? I mean, I think I described the situation well. Should I say something, say nothing? In the way I described it, did you feel that his ego kind of came to the fore, even while acknowledging and appreciating the Rabbi X that was sitting there? Or is it just me? Be happy to hear your thought on that. Go ahead, Bob.
I think if you're mentioning all the important people that you met with, implies I'm pretty important for these people to be meeting with me, you know. So
Oh,
I,
that's interesting.
so maybe inflating how important he is, you know, and you're lucky to know me.
Oh, that's the way I described it. Well, I think is pretty a good description. You felt that he was conveying how important he must be for all these people to want to meet with him.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't think of that aspect. Anybody else have a thought on this?
I would look at if it's the type of person that does this all the time, or it was just this one time occasion. I know someone in particular that all the time wants to do what Bob just said, right? And then another person may say it once, but never talk really like that the rest of the time to kind of weigh their character as far as, is this something that is normal for them or not normal for them, And
Yeah,
sometimes I
so
get the benefit of the doubt, right?
okay, that's a nice way to look at it. Um, I don't live with the guy, so I wouldn't know. He often posts things that he just published or a book that he's just written, which I think is fair game. I want everybody to know you can purchase it, you can read it, etc. But yeah, you're right. Was this a one-off, or this is pretty much the kinds of things he says often? That's a good point. Robert, you wanted to say something?
Yes. To me, that scenario sounds very similar to a situation where a person is concerned about his peers or the people that he's speaking to, as opposed to God Himself. It sounds as though he wants approval of his fellow man, but maybe forgot about, I'm sure he knew it, but forgot about that God is judging that whole scenario. So it's one of like a touch and go, I think, sir. I think sometimes the old saying, let dead dogs lie. It may not be worth the issue in that scenario.
Okay, let me ask you, Robert, if you were God, okay,
Yeah.
which is not hard to imagine, just saying.
Oh, don't start.
If you were God, how would you judge that scenario?
I would think a person's his flesh just kind of wanted everyone to know and himself to know that he's done something uh, and been with the right people or different scenarios of people, almost like validating himself
Mhm.
uh, in that type of situation. But those times and moments pass. A couple of days down the road, you almost completely forgot. It's nowhere near as important. But the things that you left with the Lord, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, it means a whole lot more. So, and it may be just a stage in that kind of situation. So, as the Lord, I'm relatively sure that He judges the whole scenario, whereas man listen to the immediacy of what's going on. Just my opinion.
No, your opinion is very valuable. Yeah, I might have mentioned last week, it's like you can't give a book review if you've only went read one page of the book.
Right. Oh, let me share this. We were talking about um, a sponge.
Yes,
Now, while you were speaking, knowing that you are a professor, rabbi, teacher, slash all of them, it's like
I
if
would
you were
like to slash all of them. How did you know I
yes.
was feeling that way? Yeah, go ahead.
If you were giving a review to your students and you told them that this will be on the test, it will be open book, you would have a sponge of a classroom wanting to know exactly what will be on that. And so you could virtually be assured that they'll get a relatively good grade. But some of the other ones, a sieve, they may or may not, especially if you didn't give the information, the total information. So
Right. So
and
for
I've
go
been in
ahead.
situations similar to that. I had something to impart, and they needed it, the
Wow.
information. You
Yeah.
know,
So we have a school-wide test that I give in my classes on February the 9th. Every class I have a two-sided handout about what are the topic of the week. And I make sure that all the students have the handout. Because this one had a cold, this one was sick for 3 days, this didn't come, blah, blah. And it's not given that everybody has that information. So at the beginning of the classes leading up to it, I have all the three piles of the handouts. And I say to make sure you have it. Come up now and grab the ones you don't have because they need the information. But yeah, you're right. They're sponges in that they want to absorb as much as they can for that test,
Yes,
so they can do well.
yes.
You're right. You're right.
I have a
Okay.
thought.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this
I
scenario?
have a thought.
Okay, Guy, go ahead.
Um, the idea is when you were mentioning it, I was thinking what he was saying, because this is what I was taking from it
Okay.
before you even mentioned
Editorialized it.
yeah, thank you. Was that the rabbi in the world of the politicians and important people and whatever would be considered very lowly, and he was pointing out that even in this circumstance here, he was feeling that the rabbi was really more elevated than the rest of them, and that's what I
Um,
picked out of it.
the rabbi that spoke or the Rabbi X who was sitting there?
There was one person
I'm
that
trying to
was
fine tune
talking.
exactly. Go ahead.
There was one person that was saying, I remembered, as I was with this meeting with this person and that person,
I
says, but
still
I
never
kept that.
forgot the teachings of.
Okay. And he was elevating that rabbi to a level
Oh,
above those other people. That's what I got out
oh,
of it.
oh, wow. You've turned this on its head. You see it as a compliment to this Rabbi X that even though he was involved and engaged in all these activities, he's elevating this rabbi to say, this Rabbi X, that he still was guided by his teachings in whatever meetings he had, whatever engagements he was involved in. The words of the rabbi still guide him, etc. So he's complimenting the Rabbi X,
Well, not only that, he was
elevating him.
conveying that his rabbinical background through the rabbi um, is higher to him than talking to all these other people.
Wow. Okay. So you each gave a very substantive perspective. And this is the idea of in Hebrew we call it to have a chavrusa or have a chavruta. It's a learning partner, you know. When people study together, etc., you always know more at the end of that session than you did before. Why? Because you know what you knew, but you didn't know what they know, and what they just told you is like, oh, that's interesting. So each of the four of you taught me a different way to spin it, or not, or say, here's what came through, even though he was that's what makes my time with all of yous very valuable. I mean, what I'm learning from you is pretty much a zero. No, I'm kidding. What I'm learning from you is at least equal to what you're learning from me. I would have not thought of, I wouldn't have thought of half of what y'all said in that perspective. Thank you. Thank you for that spark of discovery. Wow.
Baruch
Okay.
Hashem.
Thank God. All right. Absolutely. Let's see how we are in terms of time. Yeah, I don't know if we might go way over, so I don't know if I wouldn't get involved with that. Yeah. All right. I think given it's almost by me 9 o'clock, by you it's different times. And this next one is a little more involved than usual, so I don't know that we want to start for 5 minutes and then cut it. So this gives us another opportunity to be reminded that the amount of meetings, classes, lessons that we have left in Pirke Avot, these ethics of the fathers, there's not much left. When I was doing 45 half-hour videos on this for people from the nations, I created a series of notes that goes through 160 pages of handwritten notes. 160 pages. And every time I would review for our session together, I would review what I wrote and then say, oh, this comes to mind. Let me add that or let me subtract that, whatever. But the amount of classes left are maybe 6 or 8 left. So I just want to again remind everybody, you who are here and you who will hopefully watch it in replay, that we need to consider where our next step is. Do we want to continue? If so, with what? If so, do we want to take an X amount of break and then continue with a new topic? What is that new topic? Is an hour too long, too short? Do we want to cut it to 45? Do we longer? So all of these questions, I'm hoping will linger in your mind and give. The most important thing for me is 2 things. A, would you like to continue in some fashion, whether it's right away after we finish one and go to the other? But the more important one is, what might you be interested in? So you would say to me, well, give us 10 options. And I'm happy to do that, in our next WhatsApp. Here's 10 options that would involve us for the next few months, like Pirke Avot. So those 2 factors would be very important for me to know. Do you want to continue, and on what basis, and what topic you would like to choose? So let me ask quickly, given 2 minutes. Did anybody have any idea, any thought of what you think would be interesting to tackle next? A chunk of Jewish something, laws and customs of life cycle events, the weekly Torah portion, another body of moral and ethical teachings like Pirke Avot, and there are many, many different ones. So, did anybody have an early tickle about what you think you would like to proceed with? It could be no, or it could be some.
I have one.
Go ahead.
The gathering of the 10 tribes.
You mean the ingathering of the tribes?
So Mike, it's funny. It's kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4. It's kind of with my hair.
I've read your wife's book, Gathering of the 10 Nations.
Yes, I'm teaching you while my wife is teaching women. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, I contacted her and she said, I need to talk with you. So here I am.
Here you are.
I'm enjoying what we're doing now.
Me too. Thank you. I appreciate that.
The subject to me that's very important is the return of the exiles.
So you were talking about the ingathering of the 10 tribes?
Yes.
What do you imagine that being like? The history of them, taken from Tanakh, the Bible?
Well, everybody here, other than you, to my understanding, are in exile. Okay. So
exile meaning not living in the land of Israel.
Correct. You're either in the land or you're not in the land. Okay. And so I wouldn't mind. This is just, you asked for anybody have an inkling, and I'm saying this, and it might not be what everybody wants. That's fine. I'm
Inkle
just
away.
throwing it out. Pardon me?
I said you have an inkling. I said inkle away.
Okay.
Feel. All right, let me
So,
see what the possibilities of focusing on that is. I'd have to think about it. Like what would we be studying that addresses that? It's interesting that the two Hebrew words, the words for exile is geula, gola, gola. To be living in
hmm
the gola means to be
hmm
living in the diaspora,
hmm
which is a Greek word meaning itching cream. Doesn't it? Diaspora sounds like a cream that you, oh, you're
hmm
itching? Take a little dab of diaspora and just weave it around in a circular motion.
Yeah, yeah. A little dabble,
Um,
do you?
a little dab, yes. That was that Brill cream. I
Yep.
think it was. Yeah. So the Hebrew word for being in exile is gola or galut, and the Hebrew word for redemption or messianic days is geula, and they sound very similar. Geula and galut, gola. They sound very, very similar. And perhaps there's something to mine there. What is the difference? How do you transition from what did God say about living in the exile in the diaspora versus living in the land of Israel? What are the benefits of being in, are there benefits of Jews being in the diaspora as opposed to all Jews living in Israel? I don't know. Let me think about that and, pass it along when I have a better idea of what that could be. But that's interesting. That's an interesting topic. Yeah, Robert, you have a thought?
I have a thought, sir. For myself, I would be interested in the Mosaic laws and a little emphasis or sidebar with the Noahide laws, things during that time period, the laws that Moses had and the Noahide laws and the how they tie in together or if they're separate. Um, I would have a little and the Torah portion if if that kind of combination, the Mosaic laws, Torah portion, and Noahide laws.
Okay, that's
Something
interesting.
like
So our understanding is that there are seven Noahide laws. Others
right,
break them into more than that.
right,
Then there's also rabbinic laws, laws that the rabbis put into effect. For example, Hanukkah is not a biblical holiday.
right.
And yet, when we light the candles, we make a blessing. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who
Yeah.
has sanctified us through the commandment of. And you would say, commandment? It's not in the five books. What are you talking about, commandment?
Hmm.
And that refers to rabbinic enactments for various reasons that were not from the Torah, but the rabbis felt for one reason or another, we ought to enact this particular ritual, custom, a tradition. So there's also that whole chunk of law. There's the Torah law, Mosaic. You call it the Mosaic law.
Yeah.
There's the Noahide laws. There's rabbinic laws. And there's other categories of laws that could be applicable. Okay, that could be interesting. Any other thoughts, Bob? Any place your mind would go?
If you're asking my favorite kind of study, like if we were studying Torah portion or whatever, but really diving into dissecting the Hebrew words.
Oh,
And, you know, and one thing I really love is gematria. That's what I love. I just love, I don't know if you've heard of Rabbi Mordecai Kraft. Um, I see him on the internet and he does all kinds of like the DNA of the Hebrew language and all kinds of stuff, but just tons of gematria. That's
yeah. Gematria is when the rabbis assigned uh, number values to every Hebrew letter. So the
yeah,
first 10 Hebrew letters would have a value of 1 through 10. Then the next
yeah,
one's 20, 30, they're up to 100. And the last four are 100, 200, 300, 400. Gematria almost sounds like geometry. And it's the
yeah,
study of numbers and how the numbers and the letters and how much they add up to in some way predict various things that will happen or did happen, and boom, it happened on that particular date or whatever. Gematria is a very interesting study. I have books on the shelf about it, so that could be interesting.
But I love a lot of different kind
Okay.
of studies. That's just my favorite one.
Okay. Anybody, and I'll put this on the WhatsApp list too. Would anybody be interested in learning what are the 5 key prayers within the Jewish tradition from the Siddur, from the prayer book? What are the 5 biggies and what they're all about? Maybe
Yeah.
it's not interesting. I don't know. But those kinds of prayers give you an insight into what are the values and the wishes, hopes, dreams, aspirations, etc., of the Jewish community as expressed through the words that we pray. That could be interesting. Well, so these are things to think about, and I appreciate some of the suggestions that you've made. They're all good, and I hope others will think about it as well.
Is there
So,
anything
yeah.
that you aren't allowed to teach us? You know what I'm saying? That was my question. I didn't know what to ask because I don't know maybe what you can or can't teach. Does that
Like
make
what?
sense?
Well, like what?
I don't even know really per se, but I didn't know if you're like restricted to certain, like Pirke Avot and maybe Torah portions, but you can't teach us halacha or something like that. I don't know.
I can teach you about halacha or Jewish law, but it's not necessarily applicable,
Right.
outside the Jewish community. Although some people take upon themselves various Jewish traditions and rituals and customs, for which they are not directly commanded, but some people do them anyway because it makes them feel a stronger connection to God. So no, I'm not restricted. I'm not
Oh,
restricted. I don't have enough knowledge to, let's say, compare, testaments. It says here, but where did whoever get it from? Oh, it's from Deuteronomy, blah blah.
right.
I don't have that level of education about that. But in general, no, I'm not restricted. I
Okay.
don't feel restricted. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, my friends, thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Hope you got something out of it. I know I did.
Yeah,
A
sure.
massive headache that just developed.
All right, Shavuot.
Shavua Tov. Have a great week. Be happy, healthy, and safe.
Shabbat
Shabbat Shalom. And we will
shalom.
see you, God willing, next Wednesday.
Yep.
Hey,
Okay.
All righty.
Lahitro.
Let's hit the road. All right. Be well. Take care.